Those kids was my kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joel's kid, turn off the microphone so we know whose kid to blame. Yeah. Okay, testing. And now are they back on-ish? Can you hear me? No, you cannot. Okay. Not yet. So we need a little more boost. Now that's my voice. Yeah. Listen to me. I'm in charge here. Just kidding. Hi, everybody. We're so delighted you're joining us. I'm Brooke Wirtschafter, our Director of Community Organizing here at IKAR. This is going to be a fascinating conversation on a day when many, many things are happening across our city and our nation. And this is why we gather together here at IKAR to offer the community opportunities to do deep dive learning together. And we're so privileged to have access to amazing people, members of our community and members and friends of our community from far away who come and join us for conversations like this one. So this is a conversation with our beloved IKARite, Joel Snyder, a wonderful teacher here in Los Angeles, and two folks who've written recent books. Joel's going to tell you more about them, but this is Jeff Hobbs and Alexis Madrigal, and we're so glad and welcome you both here to be with us today. And so now we'll start. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you, Brooke. It's great to see everybody in here, and I'm so thrilled to have Alexis and Jeff here. I was going to call them two of my favorite people, but I didn't want, sensitive topic with spouse and children and friends in the room. But I'm a big fan of both of them. I'm going to give you guys a touch of introduction about each of them, and then I'll ask them maybe to give like a little overview of the book, and then we'll have a conversation from there. So to my immediate left is Alexis Madrigal, and I would say to me his defining trait is curiosity. He has a long career as a writer and editor at places like Wired and The Atlantic. He currently is the host or co-host of Forum on KQED in the Bay Area. And I suggest that you, as I do, podcast his episodes because I love him. He always has a side project brewing, which I love about him. Like, I feel like his middle name could be Side Project. That includes things like Pop-Up Magazine years ago, which was this very cool in-person project to bring together writers and editors. The COVID Tracking Project, where he and some colleagues really did amazing work around bringing data together on COVID. And then now just got a little whiff of his newest called The Approach, which I am intrigued by. And so let me give a warm welcome to Alexis. If Alexis is curiosity, then I would say Jeff Hobbs is empathy. And I love that about Jeff as a person, but also as a writer. Jeff and I think it's been more than a decade since we met each other and became friends. We first met when Jeff graciously came to my school to talk to a student-teacher book club about his second book, but his first nonfiction book, The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace, about a friend of his, which he can tell you more about, and is now a major motion picture. Jeff has had books since Children of the State, and particularly to me, in my heart, is Show Them You're Good, in which he spent time with some of my dearest students in South LA and followed them during their senior year of high school, along with some others. And Jeff always raises the humanity of his subjects, and I love that about him and about him as a writer. So welcome, Jeff, as well.
Thanks.
So maybe because my hunch is that most folks haven't gotten to read your books yet, but will leave here wanting to read and purchase them. Maybe you can each give like the elevator pitch or kind of the big picture before we dig in to your books.
You want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Very quickly, Seeking Shelter is just very basically the story of one family going through homelessness in Los Angeles, a mother and her 5 kids who came here from Palmdale, about 2 hours away in 2017, and they had some savings and they had a plan, and she came here so that her kids could go to better schools. better elementary schools and middle schools. And through a few, some very bad luck and just the way the city works that she didn't quite understand coming here, they were homeless within about 6 months of arrival. It's just her story of raising her kids in that situation and taking her kids to school every single day, 96% attendance rate for 5 kids, and going to work at Applebee's every day and finding shelter at the same time.
My book, The Pacific Circuits, tries to get at how our cities have changed and how our world has changed through Oakland, really one street in Oakland, 7th Street, which was kind of the center of Black life in the East Bay, in the Bay Area, and then became the neighborhood that was adjacent to the first kind of major container port on the Pacific coast before LA Long Beach kind of took everything over. And it kind of looks at the forces that have made our cities so difficult to live in, and so it locates those, in Silicon Valley technology, which has changed the way that production works. It's changed the kind of jobs that are available. It looks at it in terms of the actual sort of physical infrastructure of containers and how that has reshaped cities. And it also looks at the way that the areas, like around here, someplace like Bell Gardens or something, have been shaped by all this like logistical infrastructure. And it's told largely through the story of a woman named Miss Margaret Gordon, who's an environmental justice leader in West Oakland.
Awesome. Thank you. So before we kind of talk more, I wanted to frame why I felt like this was a conversation for IKAR, right? Because Jeff and Alexis have both been visitors to IKAR before, but it feels relevant, and I thought it would be really interesting to put in dialogue the stories that each of them are telling. Obviously, we're a community that cares a lot about the state of California, about our city of Los Angeles, about our communities, and really focuses on the humanity of every individual, which really shows up in both of these stories, and so I think that's important. Thinking about systems and how systems and people interact and the impact that both people can have on systems, but also that these sort of often amorphous, faceless systems have on people. And just this like sort of multifactorial, complicated, intergenerational impact of what happens around us, right? How people are affected by choices that seem generations away or happen in a city hall or a county, executive's office or the state legislator or obviously on the federal level, and how those things are impacting people who probably don't even know they're impacting them. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to kind of start with that framing. Mm-hmm. And maybe I thought I'd read a passage from each of yours that I chose and didn't prep you guys with, so hopefully that's fine. And then maybe you'll say a bit, and then we can dive into some questions there. So it's going to start with something from Alexis's book. And okay, so this is obviously out of context, but I think there's a lot of context in the world. Elites live in a global archipelago of cities that control where raw materials are extracted, how and where they're manufactured, and where they are shipped. An iPhone says it all. Designed in Cupertino, manufactured in China from elements shipped in from around the world. That's a supply chain, a way of making products for a company and also an ethics. The simple answer for why the Bay Area got so expensive is that its companies used the Pacific Circuit to suck up money from all of the world and concentrate it here. And while the billionaires such as Mark Benioff or Tim Cook or Sergey Brin might like the Bay Area, that's a fundamentally different relationship from old wealthy ship owners who needed dock workers to make their business run. In this rising tide of money, most people do not have a boat.
Yeah, I mean, there was a Polish theorist named Zygmunt Bauman I ended up thinking a lot about during writing this book. He had this concept he called liquid modernity. And he was using it to kind of describe the series of changes that had taken power. Still obviously exists in the world, people can wield it, but it's so much more difficult to get any kind of democratic or collective handle on it. Like there's no, like anything can happen, as he says, but nothing can be done. And man, over the last, let's say since I started working on this book in 2016, these last 9 years, you just kind of line up the events and they all fit really nicely under that rubric, it seems. And a lot of it is because of the changing relationship between the people who are making stuff and the people who work inside companies, the ways that production has been disintermediated by all of these technologies that take people further and further away from their work products and even their bosses in a lot of cases. Like the classic example being like an Uber driver. Who's the boss to complain to? It's just an app. They all know that, And yet that app acts and fulfills pretty much every aspect of what a boss would have done in the past. And so what that passage really is trying to get at is this sense that I think really needs to be like met and fought and hopefully defeated, that we really can't do anything, that there is no hope for collective power, and that we're all just going to be kind of market particles in a logistical network ordering Amazon boxes and Uber Eats to our houses. Like, we've got to find ways of re-embedding ourselves in each other's collective lives.
Awesome.
Which you all seem to do a pretty good job here. But outside of here.
Awesome. So I think I'm going to kind of do the same. And so this is from Jeff's book, Seeking Shelter. Maybe the many folds of bureaucracy that lie between proposals and results hold too much space for grift and evasion to deliver what's promised. Maybe the current economic tides sloshing across America are too great a force to counteract with mere billions of dollars. Maybe the tight handshake between the finance and real estate industries that propels city growth invariably presses down upon those who lack holdings on either side of the deal. Maybe those nearest to the bands of power will rarely prioritize the people who can't donate and don't vote at the expense of those who can and do. The fundamentals of why such aching poverty persists beneath expansive celebrated wealth are perhaps irreducible. The opportunities to escape it are narrow and limited. The collective attitude of the greater populace remains tepidly concerned and resistant to accountability. Service providers on the street level continue to perform triage, while officials in different tiers of government rhetorically push blame away. These constants persist alongside the enduring truth that for most people without shelter, to find it and keep it, they need above all to feel that they are not alone.
Oh, thanks, Joel. And I wanted to actually first speak a little bit about Joel, who is just because I'll forget to do it later, but Joel's someone I admire a lot and I don't see enough. And I just wanted to, he mentioned this book I wrote about his high school. I had reached out to him, I wanted to do something about education, and he, without really any barriers, set me up with this tremendous group of his students, and that work, nobody really read that book, which is all right, but I learned how to do my work through writing that and through Joel and observing Joel teach, and this kind of deep listening and deep caring that Joel brings every day, and that I think is very pertinent here in your community, the services I've been to here. So I just wanted to, I guess, express gratitude that I carry for Joel, and very grateful to be here. And sorry, transitioning to that kind of cranky list that he read at the very end of my book. I think I was really just speaking to the scale of this crisis here, the numbers that are really just hard to process, and the fact that, you know, when you live in a city of many millions of people where the average dwelling costs $1 million or so, the average rent for a 2-bedroom family size is $3,000, something like that. And yet, even if you can afford a house like that, you still don't want to pay more than a few dollars for a cup of coffee, and how just the math of all that does not work for a whole lot of people, and that feels I think helpless for all of us who care, and so in following the story of this family who went through the worst of all things, really, but stayed together and did find housing. They found it through an organization that just made sure that they weren't alone. They couldn't necessarily like give them a house or give them a whole lot of resources, but they could just make them feel safe for long enough, and take the stress out of every minute of every day. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at the very end of that book.
I realized that I picked passages that kind of brought us down. So let's circle back on this.
No, don't worry. The rest of the book's grim too. You know?
And I'll start low, but the question's going to bring us back. So, so let me give a little context. So I think one of the things that is a through line, Jeff, through all of your books is, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is this like, you dig so deep into individuals and they are so seen, that it gives you, such a 360 view of them. And someone in that, even though she wasn't the main character, was Wendy in this book. And so I want to kind of pin that. And then Alexis, in your book, which sort of took on this global scope, but then came back down to 7th Street, and really centered around Miss Margaret. Mm-hmm. These are people that are dealing with like the most intractable, like worst issues. Again, we're gonna come back. Like environmental racism and homelessness and like embedded inequality that just like is generational. They both seem hopeful in some ways, and I just wanted to kind of like what was the hope that you took from getting to know these people?
Miss Margaret became the central character in part because she had so many wins at the local level, actually. Environmental justice fights tend to go on for decades, right? They take a long, long, long time. But within that context, like from the beginning of Miss Margaret's, activism around these issues around air quality, because she would go to her kid's school and everyone would have an asthma inhaler, they were able to reduce the air pollution coming from diesel trucks by something like 90%, kind of depends on how you measure, but we're talking like massive improvement and lasting change for sort of all the people of West Oakland. And I always loved that kind of model that she had. I mean, this win that was very focused on helping children, almost all of whom are getting, what they called in my day, free and reduced lunch, poor children. There's now been like a step change in their health, but of course that helped everybody. That helped the truck drivers themselves, who also had very high rates of cardiovascular disease. It helped all the dock workers. It helped everybody. And so for me, that model, which I kind of think of as like the curb cut model of activism, has always been very appealing because you kind of center people who have a really direct and pressing need, but then you're not just doing the thing for them, you're actually embedding things in the environment so that all the people can kind of come along for that. And so even though Miss Margaret has quite confrontational tactics, she actually has quite a big and a base of popularity now because the things that she's actually done, the material wins, have been so good for West Oakland.
And just to thinking back, you made that connection to Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us.
Yeah, The Sum of Us. Yeah, exactly. I mean, kind of the opposite, right? In Heather McGhee's book, it's like, oh, if black children are going to go in the swimming pool, we just get rid of the swimming pool. So to me, that's almost kind of like the reverse.
Want to tell us about Wendy a little bit?
So the subject is hope, which is good. And Joel mentioned Wendy. She goes by Sister Wendy. She's a social worker in Los Angeles. And the story is so amazing because she was never actually homeless, but about 20 years ago, she had 4 young kids and was cast out of her domestic situation by an abusive husband, and she found shelter through this organization in Pasadena, and she was certified. She worked in the hospital administration for a long time, and throughout was teaching Bible study at this transitional housing. And anyway, it's a long story, but she ended up recently going back to work full-time as a social worker there. And her first client was this family that the book is about. And so you have these two women, Evelyn and Wendy, who can generate a lot of friction together, but the good kind mostly. And so Wendy's the one who kind of guided her back from, again, all that terror, all that stress of not having a place to stay each night. And it's incredibly hopeful. And I think it speaks to, I mean, this book is about one family and really one organization, one social worker. We live in a city with hundreds of pretty wonderful organizations doing very hard work. I think some probably represented here. You know, when you read about systems, a lot of what you read is very negative, but when you meet individuals working within systems, I feel like if you can separate the people from the infrastructure that they're operating in, I feel like you find almost limitless hope as far as people's ability to help each other.
I think maybe I'll ask one more. We'll see if other folks, I have plenty, but we'll see from there. Sort of on what you guys were just touching on, and then thinking about Brooke's work, particularly in community organizing. This idea, this question of building these cross-community coalitions, it comes more concretely, I think, in Alexis's book, but thinking about it, Jeff, in terms of when you talk about these Door of Hope, the places they have in Pasadena, and the resistance from neighbors, right, of what that looks like. And then in Alexis, you know, building, you know, these lines across social class or race, and also across neighborhood lines, right, trying to think about how to build solidarity, or, I don't know if solidarity, you actually have a piece on solidarity that I was thinking of there that I have to find, but, you know, like, what, I don't know what the question is, but.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll tell you what I've been thinking about this a lot, is, you know, our cities for a long time, and, you know, coming from Oakland, which is both the poster child of gentrification and also the poster child of the failure of gentrification. Somehow we got both things. Like, I don't know, but that's what happened, right? We still have persistent violence and crime and all these things, and also all the houses are worth all the money. And so I have been thinking a lot about how the idea of gentrification is also like 65 years old. I mean, this is like a Brooklyn brownstone in the mid-century idea about urban change. And it's become so embedded in the way that everyone thinks about and talks about new residents of neighborhoods. And I end the book with like my other bit of hope, which is about these organizations that are creating permanent real estate cooperatives. It's sort of a place up in the Bay Area called the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And they've created this legal framework that allows people from neighborhoods to pool their money to hold community assets, whether that's housing, whether it's commercial, whether it's other things. And the thing I love the most about it is it actually allows new residents of a neighborhood to do something aside from drive rent up. Because most people moving into West Oakland are not the richest people in the Bay Area. They're just like a few rungs up from the people who are already living in West Oakland. And yes, they're like gentrifiers. Yes, they are changing the neighborhood. Yes, people are being displaced, and the racial formation of West Oakland, which has always been very interesting and mixed, is changing. But it happens in cities. You can't just fix everybody in the place. There's not even a mechanism to do that. And so for me, the biggest thing in cities right now would be like, how do you create these sort of new coalitions and organizations that actually have material impact between legacy residents and longtime residents who have tons of knowledge and things to contribute, and newcomers who may have less of those other things, but maybe do have more resources to put into this kind of organization. So it's those things. And it's not, there's also community land trusts and all these kinds of things. And right now in East Oakland, one of the big things that they've learned from looking at these improvement initiatives around the country, like the Harlem Children's Zone, which I bet a bunch of people in here are familiar with, is Jeffrey Kennedy from Harlem Children's Zone came to East Oakland, and they were like, what's one thing you wish you'd known at the beginning? And he was like, buy all the land. Because if you succeed and things get better and there's more trees and the schools improve, then you get a lot of displacement and you lose a lot of community control over the actual physical part of the city. And so that's what they're trying to do. They have $100 million and they're putting a big chunk of it to buying a lot of buildings.
That was really comprehensive. I don't have much to add there. Just these organizations that recognize the value of living near where you can work and near where you can send your kids to school, which, like you said, is difficult because land is very valuable, and there's not many square feet of land in Los Angeles that someone's not trying to extract as much money as they can from. And so you mentioned when you asked the question kind of the conflict between neighbors, because there are organizations that try to provide family housing in well-accommodated neighborhoods in good school districts. And yeah, so in Pasadena, there is some conflict there. People don't necessarily want a homeless shelter on their block or the next block over. I think when it does happen, it tends to, people figure it out, and it tends to work out very positively, but making it happen is very hard politically.
I just want to tack on one thing. I recently read a book by Brian Goldstone, which I think rhymes really nicely with seeking shelter. And one of the things that he has been saying is there's not a single, let me see if I'm going to get this stat right for you. There's not a single county in America where you can rent a family-sized apartment, that is to say a 2-bedroom apartment, making the minimum wage in that place. And so if it's, I think working locally, LA is its own world, so I can understand people like just thinking this is an LA problem, but it's everywhere now. It's absolutely everywhere. And to me, that says maybe there's some hope in the sense that it's gotten so bad on a national level that we have a chance of doing some of the big things that need to happen, which are either like you either fix the economy in some massive way, or you need a ton of, what used to be called public housing, social housing. Like, there just is no solution for people who make like 30% of the area median income. There's no market solution for them aside from things that are going to be horribly exploitative, like long-term hotels and slumlords. I mean, that's the other alternative. And so I think figuring out how to get there politically and how, just what that would look like to have more non-market housing, it just feels like it's imperative.
So kind of to frame, I would love to hear from folks, but one of the reasons I was excited about this conversation and always excited about their work is, and I would say that excited about IKAR is that there are so many people who carry so much expertise in this community in these different kind of slices. And what's clear in both of these works is that kind of like many factors that all are coming together for the challenges that we face in our cities, in our state, and beyond. And so, I hope people will bring to questions their own sort of experience of what their work or their passion or their, whatever it may be.
Joel requesting more of a comment than a question.
Yes.
Rare thing at an event.
More, right, exactly. Just like the opposite of the some of us.
Yeah.
There you go. So there we go. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
But we're recording.
Hello. Oh. So I hear everything you're saying about those are things that we need. Are there municipalities in America that are doing that well? And or are there places in the world that are doing that well? And what is it that they're doing that we're not doing?
Just feels mean to use the European examples because they just have such a different setup. You know, Vienna and Berlin are the one that people look at a lot. There's a great New York Times Magazine reporting from a woman, I think named Francesca Mari, going to Vienna and looking at some of those things. I mean, we just had, you know, one of the things, it's not really in the book, but in researching the history of what happened to public housing, you know, the realtors have been a very powerful lobbying organization for a long time. And in the middle of the century, they just killed it off, you know. They killed off the ability to build at scale and also handicapped the funding, ongoing funding of those places, which led a lot of public housing to totally deteriorate from what was kind of all right, you know. I mean, like there's a lot of reevaluations of the history of places like Pruitt-Igoe, which was sort of a symbol of the deterioration of public housing. But now the most stable housing in West Oakland for poor people is still the public housing, and it's in good repair. It's not falling over, and it's just as old as all those other places. It's just that it had a little more maintenance money over time. And you know, I don't know that public housing as it was done has to be the answer, but the way, the sort of moral loophole that I think we've given ourselves, I certainly gave myself this, is that, oh, well, but there's Section 8, and maybe it's better to not have concentrated poverty in one place. Instead, there's people are going to be able to live in all these places. But of course, the concession for getting any Section 8 funding at all is it's not an entitlement, so it's way underfunded. And in basically every city, the number of people who could use it is much, much, much bigger than the people who can use it. And also, landlords don't have to take it, and there's probably some good reasons for that at some point, but also it means that if you're in a hot rental market, the exact rental markets in which you would want to use a Section 8 housing voucher if you're a poor person in a gentrifying area, there's nowhere for you to go with it. So, you know, the stat I just heard about Atlanta, which I thought of as like a place that did have some remaining natural low-income housing, was that like 80 or 90% of the vouchers that get issued there go unused. So you've got a waiting list like this of people who could use it, you've got the people who get the vouchers, and then you've got the people who actually can use them at the end of that.
Are they not using them because no one will take them?
Because no one will take them, and because of the various restrictions that have been placed on. Like in California, we do have a few more rules than in Georgia. And they are, the Georgia rules are essentially slanted against people who use the thing. Yeah. So depressing though, right? I mean, it's just like, yeah.
Hi, my question has to do with, it takes so long to get housing permits, and they talk about building affordable housing much faster to try to bring the rents down. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. The other thing is, as people spend more and more of their money on rent, they're not using their disposable income on other areas of the economy. Right. So it's sort of a lose-lose proposition because it affects the whole economy. These annual increases of 4 or 5% is unsustainable. Mm. So I don't know how you solve that.
I don't either. I mean, I guess one thing I'll say, I don't know, did you touch on this in your book, Jeff? It's just that these things become profitable. Like, I think the thing that is so wild is long-term stay hotels. And I'm not talking about like the nice ones where like, you know, whatever union guy who works on cell phone towers goes. I'm talking about people paying like $40 a day. That became like a hot private equity asset class through the pandemic and to today. So the fact that it's become that these things, which are literally extracting the last pennies of the poorest people in the country, are attractive to investors. Like, I don't know, we should make that unattractive to investors. Like, it does not seem to me, and I don't think there's any evidence in the record that those places take better care of the facilities or anything like that. It's purely like an extractive play.
So I had a question. So it strikes me that at its core, not the whole thing, but a big part of the problem is an imbalance between supply and demand, that you have more demand for housing than you do supply, right? Which causes the price to go up. And that the way to address that is to make it cheaper to build housing. Like if it was really cheap to build housing, you would have housing available that someone making minimum wage could live in. But I think, in fact, you can't build a house in LA and rent it to someone at minimum wage and get your money back, which is why people don't do it. And in parts of the country where it's cheaper to build, there is less of a problem with homelessness. It's not perfect, but in places where housing is cheaper, there are fewer homeless people. So it strikes me that at its core, part of the challenge here is to figure out how do we make it cheap and easy to build a lot of housing in California? And like, I don't think anyone ever talks about that.
I totally agree that that's part of the problem. I think sometimes I feel like bundling the problem makes a lot of sense. Like when you do want to make the rule, you want to simplify the rules for everybody. I still think that there's going to be two different solutions for sort of like the middle and down to sort of kind of lower middle class people. And then unless we fix the economy, I think even just like all working class people are going to need some other solution, or at least many, many of them. But I agree. I mean, I think it's certainly part of the problem. I think, you know, it's with the stopping of building apartment buildings. And there's still, I do think there's still a question, you know, I mean, the theory a lot of people have, and, you know, and I think it has some evidence behind it, is just that, you know, no matter where you build on the scale of housing, essentially it opens up spots in the rungs below it, and so people can filter. I think people have landed on calling it filtering because trickle down sounds worse. But I think there's a reality to it, and it was certainly true in the housing stock of the early 20th century that is where people lived who didn't have a lot of money. I just think there's real questions about, like, in practice, how well that's going to work if you just do what, say, has been done in different pieces of the Bay Area, where you build essentially a lot of towers, just luxury. Are there enough people that from the community itself that move into those units, or does it actually attract people from the outside into those units? And so there's nothing that's available to be filtered into, right? But you should build anyway. That's my take.
Hi. You just said you had a number of insights about folks who are maybe lower class and folks who are working class. One thing that's interesting about this conversation with this group, and also with folks who may be listening afterward online, is that there are probably a lot of people in this community and beyond, West LA, Mid-City LA, upper and upper middle class Jewish folks who own property and who are landlords, and just demographically. And so I wonder whether both of you believe that there is such thing as an ethical landlord in the broken structure and casing that you've both described and that you get into in minutia in your books. But assuming that granted that we are here right now, what does it look like to try to be a better member of a sort of cog in this broken machine, while we are also trying to do the big political structural work that both of you have alluded to?
Take it away, Jeff.
I mean, that's such an interesting question, and probably unique to individuals, because like I said, there's a lot of really good people working hard on this. The work I did in this book and what I learned most about had to do with probably working families, people who wouldn't necessarily be counted in the annual homeless counts because they didn't want to be counted, because that affects maybe where their kids can go to school and things like that. And they're people who aren't necessarily that far from being stably housed. You know, maybe it's a deposit, maybe it's kind of a black mark on their rental history. These little things that make it hard to kind of get their foot back into stability. And I feel like that's where kind of ethical landlords, who I do believe exist, could be very helpful, is in recognizing people who are close, and I think part of the argument of this book is that if we can just make it a little easier through affordable housing, through vouchers, through just individual interactions with landlords and communities being more open to who can live there, who is welcome there. I think if that sort of top level, if you could call it that, that top level of people are able to live and work and send their kids to school, then you open up all these resources for the people who need more mental health support. And I mean, we equate so much homelessness with mental health problems. And another thing I learned about this is the last thing I'll say is that being homeless makes you crazy. The stress of it is insane every day. Add kids to that. And so there's a lot of people who are very capable, competent people who once they're destabilized, it's very hard it changes you, and it's very hard to get it back. One psychiatrist told me that who works with families said that there's no kind of real rule to it, but you basically need stability for the same amount of time that you were homeless or unstable in order to start to approach the sort of a person you were. And sorry, I'm kind of rambling my way away from your very important question, but I think that landlords can be very helpful there in kind of opening space to people who can use it.
I'll give you an answer. It's getting a little bit roundabout, but I'm going to come around to it. I mean, in the book, I talked to a guy who ran the international for the ILWU, which is like the longshore union that controls the Pacific coast here, and told a story basically about like the way that who they negotiate with has changed. So, in the old days, the people who, and it's kind of alluded to in the passage that Joel read, in the old days, most people that they were negotiating with, the shippers, were local people who owned a ship or a department store, things like that, right? Over time, they now negotiate with like a lawyer of a global shipping company that may or may not, in fact, doesn't care about the Bay Area and the longshoremen or any of those things, right? They don't feel bound up in sort of any kind of collective fate kind of sense. And it's worse. It's worse, I think. It's better. I think what I took away from my Brian McWilliams conversation and the conversations with ILWU labor leaders in the book over years is like who the elites are really does matter, and how they view their role within the city and their responsibilities within the city. And I think that extends all the way down to like everyday landlords, like people seeing their tenants not as some other form of human, but just a person who's living in their house. I do think really matters versus a private equity group that, for example, just automatically issues an eviction the second somebody's late with their rent. Like I think that maybe on a small scale, it really does matter. And I also wish that there were other housing options for people so that landlords of very inexpensive properties were not sort of the last line of defense so that people weren't going to become homeless. Like that seems like a bad situation. It also seems like something fewer and fewer people are going to want to do. And I think there's real, we passed this ADU law, right, in California, and then in the Bay Area, various cities tried to add a whole bunch of renter protections onto ADUs, which seems on its face like a really good idea, except for you realize a lot of these ADUs, someone's like basically living in your house, and you can't say, sorry, I don't want anyone in my house. And so a bunch of ADUs are no longer on the rental market, right? And is that unethical? I don't know, but it certainly seems like in practice, there's a lot of problems with trying to legislate the ethics of like a small-time landlord,
Take one more and then close. Oh, Tom. Yeah, sorry. I'm paying for this microphone. To ask, here at IKAR, we hear a lot about getting proximate to people. Brian Stevens is getting proximate to people, gaining compassion and learning about other people by getting to know them. Jeff, I know from your work that that's what you do in your books. You get proximate to people. You give us a close-up. I'm one of the people who actually did read the book you said no one read. Thank you. It was great. You should all read it. Ask is if we hear a lot about people experiencing homelessness, stereotypes about them that they're addicts, they're mentally ill, they're people who don't want to be living on the streets. What did you learn? Are there generalizations that you can give us, or specifics about what you learned about the homeless population in our city, about who they are and who they aren't? You sort of touched on it before, but maybe you can go into more detail on that.
Sure. I mean, I wanted to learn about families, I guess, and the reason where this work came from. I was actually writing a book about juvenile halls, which brought me to San Francisco to a juvenile hall there, and so I spent time with dozens, maybe hundreds of kids who were incarcerated for different reasons, and I learned just in these conversations, every one of them in their youth had at some point experienced housing instability, and I don't mean a lot of them, I don't mean most of them, I mean every single kid I met in juvenile hall in 3 different cities had experienced it in some form, and that's kind of what was the spark for seeking shelter. And then more to answer your question, so I was spending time in schools, I was talking to counselors, I was just interested in kind of the youth experience, and I was in this transitional housing facility where I met Evelyn, who's the main character, for the first time. And she knew who I was, and I'm kind of an awkward guy, and we were having a conversation, and so I thought she'd talk about her challenges, and all she wanted to talk about for an hour and a half that day was her kids, and the kid who likes baseball, and the son who's good at math, and her older kid who'd gotten in trouble, but he wasn't really a bad kid, etc. And most people I know in the world just want to talk about their kids, and so not to be too kumbaya, but that sort of a commonality of caring about the same thing, I think crosses some of these very defined lines that, like, the media makes. And obviously, I'm not talking about people with addiction and people with serious mental health problems, but families with kids in school, at rec centers, caring about the same things. I think it's easy to lose sight of that in our day-to-day.
Do we want to end?
No, I think that's great.
All right. So I struggle. So I work in this field, and I'm one of the psychiatrists who can tell you about the 20 years and how long it takes. But I think we combine a lot the preventative measures and the fixing measures. And here in LA, we spend, not judging, a lot on trying to fix really intractable, terrible, awful problems. And we don't prevent people who are housed, who are just hanging by, from falling into that homelessness. And we prioritize people almost in some ways who have been homeless the longest, and by prioritize, I mean spend the most money on. People who have been homeless the longest, who are the hardest to house, and we don't do a lot. When we think of Europe as being a model, the reason it works is because they prevented a lot of terrible things from happening in the first place. And we don't focus a lot because it's invisible, and they're not the people who we drive by and get upset by, on people from falling into homelessness in the first place, right? So your family who had been housed, all they needed was a house, and they can be housed. They know how to live in a house and be housed and pay rent and do all of the things they need to do and send their kids. Like, that's easy. That's like rent, and you're done, right? Like, but we don't do that. And 20 years later, that woman is going to be someone different who's going to be really, really difficult. And I think when we talk about these issues and we don't separate things, I think we run into a problem of things. It's just not, we can't fix and prevent. So, I don't know what we do, but it's a really difficult challenge that I think doesn't get, these are two different groups of people, and they can all wind up exactly like one group of people. Anyway.
Now, the one thing I'll add to that is that the way that we have ended up counting homelessness, these like point in time counts, people might be familiar with those, one day of the year. Like, I was like, why do we do it like that? It's not like if you want to know about like corn futures, you just go out one day, and look, this is not how government statistics are done. It's not a volunteer thing where people walk around and see who's homeless on the street. It's crazy. And so I was like, why do we do it like this? And I was talking to this Brian Goldstone guy. I just read his book, and so I'm really thinking about it. And he basically thinks it was intentional. It was basically to make homelessness seem as if it was only the people who are, smoking meth on the street and not the people that you're writing about in your book, because then they can be turned into sort of a class of people that can be ignored and dehumanized, versus what books like yours are doing of rehumanizing people and making sure, like, no, this is just someone who wants their kids to go to good schools and also happens to be homeless, as opposed to the experiences that people have with the people who are on the street who are really struggling with mental health issues and drug addiction. So the idea that that was an intentional turn during the Reagan administration was quite revealing for me.
I have a question about, it sounds to me like you both have stories to tell about community, and in both cases that community is part of how you find something to be hopeful about and see a way forward. And I wonder if that's something you could just sort of reflect on and draw out a little bit more for all of us.
I could reflect on that a lot. I might just say that Sister Wendy was actually going to come, the social worker I've been talking about a little, but she this afternoon was throwing a birthday party in the yard of one of the shelters they run,
Miss Margaret and a lot of different community leaders there come from this kind of lineage of folks. There were 5 women in Bayview Hunters Point that were known as like the Big Five. But the thing that I've always loved, Bayview Hunters Point is, it was a shipyard place a lot of Black people migrated to in the Bay. And the best thing is, if you go back in the historical records, the 5 women keep changing. It's like there's probably 15 or 20 people who, if you asked, one of their nephews, is your auntie like in the Big Five? They'd be like, definitely, And I just like it because it says that it's more of the idea that there's a set of people who are going to go to all the community meetings, who are going to know what's going on, who are going to tell you when it's time to go to think about some other set of issues. It's just like the Big Five are like the idea of a community organizer. And so many of the current generation of leaders in the Bay Area are somehow connected to those women. And I think it's because that tradition and that way of thinking about how you interact with power turns out to be really important to people, quite effective, and it's led to a lot of good things.
So I know there are a number of questions, and hopefully afterwards people can come up to Alexis and Jeff if they'd like to. I kind of wanted to end on one last thing. I also know both of these, both Alexis and Jeff as dads, as great dads. And on this Father's Day weekend, I'm thinking about how they wrote these books as dads of pretty young children. And just, thought that was a nice way to end, but thinking about if there's any thing about the experience of being a parent and writing these books that may have been notable, probably not something you're asked normally. So it could be just a Happy Father's Day and then go on our way. But.
Yeah, give me
Yeah,
a
I think
second.
I think one thing my kids have really gotten, and I think this place gives me these vibes, is this kind of feeling of the chosen family, which I think runs very strongly through a lot of communities where people are very marginalized and oppressed. You know, blood families get broken up, and then people end up reforming into these other formations of care, and I think those things are so beautiful, and it's something that is very, you know, I'm in a cis hetero marriage and then we own a house, but we've brought a lot of that thinking inside, and I think that it has really changed the way our kids think about family. They always talk about how many aunties they have now, you know, which is many, many, many. Yeah.
Not just Big Five.
Not just a big five. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. And yes, I mean, you remember, Joel, I would have to bring one or both of my kids to your school when I was working on that book. They have to tag along a lot, and they don't always like it. But and if we're at a homeless shelter or something, but I always hope it's meaningful in the end. And I mean, I also write about lots of young people as well, so I can't totally make sense of it in a sentence or two, but yeah, it all, as all parents know, everything is kind of entangled, and you hope to just do good things with it.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. It's great to have you.
Hey, thanks.